when we challenge an already over-challenged nervous system, we create overwhelm, or there's more potential for overwhelm. And a dysregulated person is less able to learn new skills. We know that now. This isn't polyvagal theory, it's neuroscience, where the more activation you have in the nervous system, the less integration you have. And so you're less able to access the multiple pathways and the multisensory pathways that are needed to build new skills. So the SSP targets regulation as a foundation to building other skills.
Welcome back to Mother's Guide Through Autism podcast. I'm Bridget Shipman, and I'm your host. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Kelly Bein. And Kelly is a seasoned occupational therapist with over 28 years of clinical experience, including 18 years with certification in sensory integration. Kelly is now Clinical Solutions Manager for Unite and works as part of the strategy team. Outside of her role at Unite, Kelly is growing a global mentorship program to make best practices more accessible for sensory OTs in private practices. Kelly specializes in sensory processing and applications of polyvagal theory in OT. She is an international speaker, has published 2 children's books, and was named Autism Parenting Magazine's top OT for 2 consecutive years. While almost an empty nester, Kelly is a sensory parent herself, which has led to many insightful and unexpected learnings along her professional and personal path. Hi, welcome back to Mother's Guide Through Autism podcast. I'm very happy to tell you that Kelly Bein is going to be our interview today. If you listen to the bio, you know she has a great, lengthy list of experiences, knowledge, and since this podcast is all about knowledge, hope, and inspiration, we felt like she would be a perfect guest for our podcast. So welcome to Mother's Guide, Kelly.
Thank you, Bridget. I really appreciate it. And I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, so I'm going to dive into our interview. We visited just a little bit before I hit the record button. Would you tell us briefly what you do and how you came to do what you do?
Thank you. Yes, I'll try to make that part succinct. I've been an OT for 30 years, so it's easy to get sidetracked on those details. But as an OT for 30 years, I started in geriatrics and then over the years got to work with progressively younger and younger ages. And it was my mom that first mentioned OT to me. She was a special ed teacher. And I think that that's valuable because at the time I was interested in becoming a psychologist or doing something in the mental health field. And I was actually not interested in pediatrics. And so I've come full circle over the years. And when I began my work in geriatrics, I knew that I wanted to do mental health. And so I took a job in mental health services and worked across the continuum of care in different positions. And it was my position in community mental health services where I was working as the director of child and adolescent services, starting an after school program and a respite program for kids with emotional and behavioral challenges that led me to understand or learn about sensory integration. And I saw all these kids that moved differently. I saw them learn differently. I started doing some work in residential treatment, in a residential treatment center. And so these movement and learning patterns were something that struck me and something I felt compelled to learn more about. And it was paired with this observation that despite having all kinds of services available and supportive families, this was at the beginning of when wraparound services became a really big thing. That it was a brand new innovation at the time, if you will. And I thought, we're missing something, these pieces that aren't being addressed, the movement patterns, the learning patterns. And despite having all the services, these kids weren't getting better. And so I started learning about sensory processing, and I felt like it was a missing piece of the puzzle. I took some time off to have my own kids. And when I came back, I started working in private practice with another practice here in town. And that led me to develop my own practice after I learned lots of other things. And I started by actually implementing listening therapies. And so it was listening therapies using the integrated listening system that helped me grow my practice and really combine the SI and mental health work that I had been developing over the recent years. And then because I was using the ILS when the SSP was released, it was an easy jump in for me to embrace that program. And that's what has led me here today. I'm now working as the clinical solutions manager at Unite, working with teams of therapists. And I also offer trainings and mentorship on my Kelly Beins consulting side. And so I'm able to offer hopefully some supportive work to other therapists learning to integrate these tools and develop an integrated approach to practice.
Yeah, that's great. I know that you specialize in sensory processing, as you
Yes.
shared, and applications of the polyvagal theory in OT.
Yes.
Would you tell us, because there are a lot of parents and educators and all kinds of professionals, OTs, when we talk about our autism community that may not know what that is. So can you explain that to us?
Yeah, it's a loaded question because there are lots of pieces to integrating sensory integrated practice with polyvagal theory. And so, for those who are interested in understanding more about sensory integrated processing, it's rooted in the work of Gene Ayers, and it encompasses various models of working with kids who have sensory processing challenges. So, I would encourage people to dive into that world, doing different searches and learning. But the polyvagal piece is really the piece that was new to me when I went into my own private practice. And polyvagal theory is really the foundation of understanding human interaction and understanding how the nervous system influences and uses sensory processing to support function and interaction. And the short answer to what is polyvagal theory is that it's about the science of safety. And when people feel safe, it's easier for them to engage. And this is people of all ages. And it's based on the premise that human connection and relationship, we're hardwired for that. And in thinking about kids with autism or people with autism, it's really a neurodiverse way of understanding their approach to the world. It's not one way is better than the other. It's how do we understand someone's individual nervous system to then understand what they need in order to connect. So, how can we shift what we're doing? How can we shift the environment to be more supportive? And how can we build connection based on understanding our nervous system and theirs and how two people's nervous systems interact?
I love that so much because before we get on, I told you, I love learning. And so I'm just curious, how long has this theory been around?
It was originally released, I believe, and don't quote me. I'll find out and I'll let you know for
Well,
sure. We'll put it in
ish.
the show notes. But
Yeah.
1994 is
Okay.
when I think it was first released, but it is based on decades of study by Dr. Porges. Dr.
Okay.
Stephen Porges is the author and the neuroscientist who developed the theory. And he has written multiple books. He's got, I don't even know how many publications. And there are multiple books that have been written since
Mhm.
on polyvagal theory.
Okay. Yeah, I love it. So I think parents at the beginning of this journey, this is so wonderful for them to learn about because, and like you said, it's for all ages, but wow, right? I mean, yeah.
it changed the way that I thought about myself and my own family and every single client. And it's not like I wasn't doing things that were in alignment with polyvagal theory, but what polyvagal theory did was just really deepen the language I had to share with families about the nervous system. And it built my own capacity to be more curious and to be patient and to enjoy different opportunities that I had with clients. It allowed me to step outside of power struggles. And it really helped me to shift my perspective on my role with sensory integrated processing. A big piece of what we do in our therapy is, well, in OT in general, whether it's a sensory integrated practice or not, we're always looking at that client environment fit and the just right fit between a task and the person's capacities within the environments in which they function. And that just right fit, I often filter through this lens of what skills am I trying to build? What's that challenge that I need to present and to create a fit with that challenge? But instead, now with polyvagal theory, I don't see my job. Yes, I want to challenge when the client is ready, but it helped me embrace building readiness as part of my role. And is when I can create and facilitate an experience of felt safety for a client, they are way more likely to challenge themselves.
Yeah.
They will inherently move forward with self challenging and exploration. And so polyvagal theory really helps you understand approach and avoidance as different ways of interacting and looking at those as adaptive, those responses as adaptive, so that I wasn't trying to fix something all the time. And I wasn't trying to over challenge and I didn't step in too soon. I mean, we all still, make mistakes here and there, but it really allowed me to get a much bigger perspective on my role and how to work with parents and what I could offer them.
Yeah, this is so great because I know there's going to be so many moms out there listening, right? And would you help, like, from the parent perspective of how relevant this theory is, the polyvagal theory is to children with autism?
I think it's highly relevant. It's highly relevant to every human because we all have nervous systems. But I think it's especially relevant to families that have a child diagnosed with autism because autism presents with lots of different symptoms, and sensory sensitivities is one of them. And polyvagal theory helps us understand those adaptive responses when someone's nervous system is in a fight or flight mode, and sensitivities can cause lots of activation in the nervous system. And so I think it helps us to understand those differences, but it also helps us understand relationship and how we as parents can become activated when we're in these interactions. Again, not just with kids who have autism, but in general as a parent, but even more so when we're working with someone who's autistic, because the differences can be bigger in our nervous systems. And so I think it gives us a lens through which to understand some of those differences and to really dig into even building capacity to tolerate some of the behaviors that come instead of trying to change them. And I also think, polyvagal theory, eh, there's a whole, and I don't even, I'm still learning about perceived demand avoidance, PDA, and the whole world of PDA. But when we think about polyvagal theory and safety, polyvagal theory suggests that context, choice, and connection are the three C's of safety, if you will. And I think Deb Dana coined these. Deb Dana's a brilliant clinician who's helped to make polyvagal theory accessible to providers and families and people in general. But those three C's of safety are practical things that we can do using this polyvagal lens to support someone or interact more effectively with another person. We can create more context for them. We can create more opportunity for connection, and we can offer choice. And when somebody is feeling threatened, when somebody is feeling out of control or has a loss of autonomy, we can infuse elements of context, choice, and connection to create more potential for safety in their nervous system.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, learning as you speak, I'm thinking what parent or even teacher, or like you said, it's for every single person to really get a better understanding of how we function. And
Mhm.
I think there's layers is what I'm gathering.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And layers for each of us at different times. And so the other thing that polyvagal theory does and did for me was helped me understand this bidirectional relationship within the nervous system. We used to think in terms of top down or bottom up. We used to think of regulation as on or off, like the amount of activation in the nervous system. There was either too much or not enough, and it was somewhere on that continuum. But it's not linear, it's a bi-directional, dynamic, ongoing balance in the nervous system, if you will. And Dr. Porges often talks about homeostasis. And everything we do and all of our neurophysiological mechanisms within our brain and our body are built to maintain homeostasis.
Yes. Well, I could just stay on the polyvagal theory for, like, I'm ready to go to school, right? I'm ready to
You and
learn
me
more.
both.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but when you're talking within that context, tell us about the safe and sound protocol. You were talking about safety, the 3 Cs. What is this safe and sound?
Yeah, thank you. So, the Safe and Sound Protocol is a listening therapy that was developed by Dr. Porges as an application of the polyvagal theory. And so it relies on music, sound that is filtered through an algorithm that emphasizes the bandwidth of speech. And there are different pathways of music that you can choose. And the therapeutic pathway, or the most therapeutic pathway, if you will, there that has the most therapeutic potential is the core pathway. And that core pathway is the one that accentuates the bandwidth of human voice. And he does that or did that, put that together because he learned that that inherent to voice is safety because we're wired to connect. And Dr. Porges, as an aside, there are lots of resources on Unite website that you can understand or learn about the history of Dr. Porges and the evolution of the Safe and Sound protocol. But the fascinating part for me as a pediatric therapist was thinking about parent-child connection and working with children who had come from really, really difficult backgrounds, histories of trauma, were currently going through histories of trauma, and understanding the role that human voice plays in supporting this evolutionary need we have for connection. And then looking at the cranial nerves, the vagus nerve that targets the parasympathetic system, all of these things are connected. And so using sound as a portal to the nervous system for regulation made sense. It fit with my practice. And that's what the SSP does. And I have used it with many children and families who are trying to understand the challenges that present with autism and using the SSP to help them learn to regulate, help them learn to engage with each other, building attunement, offering the opportunity for reparative attachment experiences, and even helping kids with sound sensitivities lose those sound sensitivities so that they could function, returning to school, having play dates, going to community outings, even going outside. I worked with one child who wasn't able to go outside because his neighbor had a dog and he was afraid of that dog. And after different rounds and other combining it with OT intervention, he was able to go outside again and play and ride his bike and go to different functions. And that's life changing. And it wasn't until the SSP that I felt confidently able to offer families something that I really trusted was going to work and get to the root of that dysregulation or modulation challenge.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. Listening to all of that, Joseph had a therapy called auditory integration training when he was like 4. Joseph's 31. And is that similar or because yeah, I don't know the
Yeah,
difference.
great question. And lots of people ask because there are other listening therapies available. I don't know AIT in depth, so I can't really speak to the nuance differences, but I can say that the SSP is the first that is put through this algorithm with the lens of polyvagal theory and building safety within the autonomic nervous system. So leveraging the cues of safety in human voice or emphasizing those specific cues in order to create more flexibility and leaning in, if you will. Dr. Porges talks about tuning in to retune the nervous system. And so the way I describe the difference is until I found the SSP, I was going to that challenge. I was always challenging the nervous system. And when we challenge an already over challenged nervous system, we create overwhelm or there's more potential for overwhelm. And a dysregulated person is less able to learn new skills. We know that now. In this is a polyvagal theory, it's neuroscience, where the more activation you have in the nervous system, the less integration you have. And so you're less able to access the multiple pathways and the multisensory pathways that are needed to build new skills. So the SSP targets regulation as a foundation to building other skills. And other listening programs often build skills without looking at that need for regulation. Not all of them, but SSP targets regulation alone. And so it's about being with the client and creating capacity to engage in these other therapies.
Mhm, yeah, so what it sounds like to me, the difference is that the safe and sound protocol with the polyvagal theory is it's an all-inclusive you get, I guess, more for your buck, with a lack of better way of understanding
I
it,
feel that.
or versus, "Okay, this is gonna help with the sound frequency that hurt my son's hearing," where this is an all-inclusive nervous system, so we're gonna see, yeah, the frequency improvement, but we're also gonna see him relax a little bit more, being able to make friends. I mean, it's an all-inclusive program versus just a part of it.
Yeah,
Am I
yeah.
understanding
And
that right?
yes, and I want to qualify or clarify that the SSP is intended to be used alongside other interventions or modalities and or in conjunction with an overall therapeutic process. So someone that is using other interventions, including other listening therapies, could still use the SSP first or after. It wouldn't necessarily get used at the same time. So, for example, I had some kids that were going through occupational therapy intervention, and I might pause my SI intervention to do the SSP and then return to OT. Or I might do it in conjunction. Whereas I had a couple of adults that I was not doing sensory integrated processing work with them, but they contacted me to use the SSP. And we did that first. And then I referred them to mental health services or other interventions that were indicated.
Okay, yeah, the thank you for clarifying that because, as a parent, there's so much out there, and
Yeah.
moms come to me and they're completely overwhelmed. So I do the mom emotional support work, right? And that's one of the things that absolutely comes up every time. I don't know where to start.
Yes, I assure you, I get the exact same thing. And the SSP for me became foundational. I always held the SSP in my thinking. And it didn't mean we did it right away. We wanted to work on building some readiness. But that was the other love that I had. It's been a true gift to me in my practice, is it's something that allowed me to give the parent an experience of success. I had parents say to me, one parent described their listening sessions as spa time with their child.
Yeah.
They were finally able to enjoy their child again and to really have a way to build connection. And I loved being able to say to a parent before we began, your job here is to do nothing but enjoy your child and connect with them and nurture. And as parents, that goes to our core. That's what we want to do. That's why life has been so hard, is because we can't and we don't know. And we struggle to build that and to feel that. And many parents, by the time they seek help, have been struggling for so long, and or the child has struggled so long, that to not have to be on and try to fix something the whole time is a relief. It
Yeah.
loves being able to witness that and to be a part of facilitating that. And it was beautiful to see. Not easy
That's
all the
huge.
time, but
It
yeah.
it's big. That's huge because there's very little understanding and every, like my son Joseph said, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one, but at the same time from the parent perspective, it's you're on 24/7, right? And so
Yeah.
hearing you say that almost, I can feel that, like, I think of my young self, and I probably would have just broken down and cried for just, "Thank you for
Absolutely.
understanding me," like that,
Yeah.
thank you." Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, uh, that parent piece was so instrumental in supporting the change that comes as a result of the SSP. So it isn't just the music, it's about using that music in the context of connection, that member connection, context, and choice. And when a parent knows that they have a role and we're offering the structure of this listening in order to help them feel successful in that way, it's really powerful. And the co regulation that children can get, even if it's not verbal, and even if the parent themselves feel like they don't know what they're doing, that child knows that that parent is there for them and they feel it. So it's about feeling and being open to the connection that starts to make some of those shifts. And sometimes the shifts are subtle. They're not always legible right away, but it goes to those foundational parts of what people need to build regulatory capacity and to move forward in developing other skills.
Well, I think that's huge. I think this is one of those episodes where you may need to listen to it more than once to really because listen, to truly understand it, that because I've like I said, I've been around a while and honestly, I have never heard of polyvagal theory ever. And when you said it's been around since 1994, I'm like, really? I have never heard of it, and so if I haven't, my goodness, I'm so glad that you're here and talking about
Thank
this
you.
because it's so very, very important. Like, I'm feeling your passion, and now it's in me, so I'll be able to help more parents help their child because of this conversation, so, so glad you're here. I do
Yes.
want to know. Tell us what Unite does. We have so much to talk about, so we're
Well, thank you. I'm grateful that it's already been helpful, but I'm just as grateful for Unite, because Unite is the company that brings forth two very instrumental listening therapies. The SSP is the one kind of foundational product that Unite produces and shares with the world. And the other is the integrated listening systems, the ILS, previously known as the focus system. And so the ILS is the one that I started my private practice with. And that was the first listening therapy that I was trained in. And I used that to support skill development. And when they released the SSP, that's when I embraced it and started using the SSP to support regulation and the ILS to support skill building in my clients. And being a pediatric OT, I had a lot of clients who had autism, and both were needed. Sometimes clients used both programs. Sometimes they used one or the other, depending on what the primary presenting challenge was. And Unite is the company that brings these programs and these services to individual providers as well as organizations.
That is, also important to know. So when I get to the end of our interview, I wanna know how we get all this great stuff in our lives. So I can't wait for you to share that. But before we do that, I would love to know some success stories.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, my favorite part.
Yeah, me too, me too.
Sharing when it works. So I think I hinted at one where a child with significant sound sensitivities was able to go out into the world because his sound sensitivities disappeared. This was an 8-year-old child whose parents came to me because they were receiving services elsewhere and had received many services elsewhere, but he just wasn't improving. They had pulled him from school and they were homeschooling. This is a child that was adopted, so had an early, I forget when he was adopted, but had an early experience of trauma and, disruptive attachment early on, and things got progressively harder and harder. And he had been through many schools. They told him that he was being homeschooled through a virtual school, and he had related services as well as other therapeutic services. And this family reached out to me. I forget how they found me, but I immediately thought about SSP because this child had such dysregulation and was experiencing difficulty with engagement and relationships. And so I felt like SSP was a really good place to start. This family was also from out of state. And so coming into the clinic for OT services wasn't a viable option for them. And I felt like SSP was going to be a way to offer some intensive support that we might be able to see, as you said, get bigger bang for your buck in a shorter amount of time. And we hear that from providers often now, is that the SSP can accelerate outcomes. At the time when the SSP was first released, it was a 5-day protocol. And I thought, if this family can come and see me for 5 days and we can make a difference, this is going to be huge. And it was. And so they came to me, and I think it was day two. I had a little room that we used for listening. It was a very quiet, kind of small, off the hall, off the main hallway environment. And I was sitting in there with this child. We had built some rapport the first day, but he was this child that was angry, didn't want to be there, almost refused, but I think, really was wanting things to be different. And I use a very play based approach. So he had lots of options for playful sit down, his choice, context, choice, connection. And day two, there was the baby that went through or past the room that we were in, and the baby cried. And he said, I want that baby to die. And initially, like, I was like, oh, like you just to feel the anger. And I just said to him, that really bothers you, that upset, that you're hearing that baby cry. Yes, that baby's too loud. And it was more about the sound than it was about that baby, right? So that was day two. And we also happened to have workers moving things and making lots of sounds that day. It wasn't a great day for this poor young boy. Day three, he came back and was willing to listen. And that night, was it that day? No, day four, the morning of day four, before mom arrived, she texted me and she said, I want you to know that he just ate breakfast in the hotel lobby, sitting right underneath the television. And I didn't even realize it until we were sitting there and there were other kids laughing. Somebody yelled something. The TV was going, the clanking of all the dishes. She said, this is something he never would have done before. And he didn't even hesitate. So I wanted you to know that because I didn't want to say it in front of him. So that was the text. And then day 5, that evening, mom texted me again and said, we're eating out for the first time in years. We're at a fast food restaurant and we're eating out, and I can't even believe it. And so that was one of the biggest successes. And I thought, okay, this is amazing. How long is it going to last? And mom reached out to me months later and said that she had signed him up for a summer camp, that he was able to successfully return to school and do his testing. And he did whatever testing was necessary to finish out the year. And he went to a summer camp with other kids for a week. So that was my biggest success story. And not all of them were like that, but I definitely call that one a success. The other quick success was an adult that I worked with who had autism, called me because of the SSP. And he would not say that he was successful after listening. In fact, was disagreeing and was complaining that he didn't see the outcomes he wanted and was frustrated. So superficially seemed like a negative outcome. But on day 1, when I met with this client for the initial intake and the assessment, he wouldn't look me in the eye. He was speaking very sternly in very short sentences. He almost disengaged completely and refused to come back. By day 5, after listening, actually, it was after day 5. So in the follow up, when we were reviewing the outcomes, he was looking me in the eye. His speech was fluid. He talked about going out to the gym to exercise. He talked about going to a party with work colleagues. This was a client that was working from home and was not going anywhere. And so, even though he didn't agree or see the outcomes he wanted, I heard in the report these differences in him. And I consider that a success as well.
Well, I certainly do too, and that, part of our podcast is the hope factor. And I just think that when we share those stories, we do offer hope because it is so difficult. And again, every child has their own challenges, but I work with moms that have these young adults that are so angry, they're depressed, they're when you mentioned the mental health aspect, but yet they refuse the help. So it puts the parent in a very difficult position because you have this child that you're caring for that cannot live independently,
Yes. Yeah.
but yet refuses the help. And so when you were talking about that, I can think of so many moms that I've worked with that really could use this help.
Absolutely. And, that refusal is the other reason that I like having a tool like the SSP, because most people, I should say everybody, I don't like absolutes, but most people know the value of music. Now, what kind of music varies from person to person, but most people have experience with music. Most people have had a positive at some point in their lives with music. And so it's an easier entry than months and months and months. Now, could take a long time, but like sometimes years of therapy for small gains. I like that I can say to someone, this is 5 hours of music. It's worth trying. And we can talk about it as you go. We can shift it as we go. You will get to choose what you do while you listen. I want you to tell me what it's like while you listen, because that determines A, how we keep going, and B, helps me understand whether it's actually working or not. And so when I can say it like that to someone, it offers context, choice, and potential and hope for connection. And everybody wants that at some level that I have found.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So, what is your advice for parents raising a child on the spectrum?
Mm. I don't feel entitled to give advice because even though I'm a sensory parent and I'm an occupational therapist, I struggle because everyone's lives are so different, right? I never want to assume. But one thing that I've learned from many parents is that honestly, there will always be things that are hard. And if we only try to change the hard, then we miss those opportunities for connection. And glimmers, dev data, another dev data verbiage, dev data talks about glimmers. When we look for the glimmers, we start to notice more glimmers. And using those glimmers to balance out some of the hard can build capacity in the nervous system for parents who are dealing with the hard. So I would say that's what I would offer in the way of support.
Well, I think that is great advice because when you're in it like that, you get so used to it's easy to be in a negative space, right? So, look for the glimmer, look for the hope. See
Absolutely.
see even if it's, only you see the growth, celebrate it.
Yeah. Yes. And it's not going to change everything all at once. And that leads to all the other things, different things are going to work at different times. But if we maintain that perspective of the glimmers and try to grow them and apply them and look for them, it can counterbalance a lot of what's hard.
Well, I think that's beautiful and positive. I'm still recovering from a cold, so sorry. Is there anything else you wanna mention before we go?
So I think I appreciate the opportunity and I want to thank you. And I would encourage anyone and everyone to learn about polyvagal theory, to learn about the ILS and the SSP, and to be open and curious. And thank you.
Yes, I concur. And where can people go to find out more about you, your work, and how do we find you?
Oh, thank you. So the Unite website is www.integratedlistening.com. And you can learn about Unite and the programs that are there. And my own personal work is through Kelly Beins Consulting. And you can go to Kelly at kellybeins.com.
That is wonderful.
I just want to also offer there is a website for clients to learn, and that's called whatisthessp.com.
Oh, that's so helpful. Thank you. Well, my hunch is that a lot of people are gonna be looking for you, and I know I'm gonna speak to my son, see if he would be interested. Yeah. So I can't tell you enough thanks and gratitude for being on Mother's Guide Through Autism podcast. And I hope you come back.
I would love to. Thank you so much, Virgin. I appreciate it. Thank you to everyone for listening.